Is there now?
See it on Facebook?
Not on YouTube. It's on YouTube.
Not on Facebook.
On YouTube. It's not on Facebook?
Can you mute the?
So
the
those are
middle one should be unmuted, right?
Yeah.
Huh? Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We got it now? No.
No. Yeah, there you go, Shaykh.
Okay. I think these glitches happen because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to actually, tawajjuh ilayhi. Probably we're focused, on the tech. We need to focus on the creator of tech. So, inshallah, tawajjuh ilallah, inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us to get through the rest of the dars without more glitches. So we want to talk about, first of all, the first people who accepted Islam within the household of Rasulullah. We mentioned last time that, of course, the first person to accept Islam al-itlaq, totally was a Sayyidah Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha. And we remember that probably we mentioned that as soon as Rasulullah, this heaviness of the revelation was revealed, and Nabi khiftu ala nafsi, I feared for myself. Perhaps, I'm not going to survive this incident, this event, or what. And it was Khadija radiallahu anha that was there to comfort him, to support him, to build his morale, to support him in every way, shape, and form. And obviously, since she was the biggest, you could say, sort of, I don't know if it's appropriate or not, the greatest fan of Rasulullah from the very beginning. So obviously she was the first person to accept Islam. Now ladies, take this, this is a fadila for the ladies, that the first person to accept Islam was not a man, it was what? Keep that in mind. We're also going to see that the first shaheed, Sayyidah Sumayya radiallahu anha, she was the first shaheed in Islam. So the first martyr in Islam was also a woman. So Sayyidah Khadija radiallahu anha, she was the very first to accept Islam. Okay. And subhanallah, and throughout her through her life, she was the first and foremost, of support for Rasulullah. And as a result, obviously, Nabi was so, extremely fond of her, and so much, and had such a compassion and love for her. And he used to even mention, even after her death, he used to mention her so much that Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha, who was, the one virgin who actually Rasulullah married, and all of his other wives, were elder, had either been married or divorced, or their husbands had died, etc. So Rasulullah but kept on mentioning Khadija radiallahu anha, and keep in mind that she was 15 years most likely his senior. And so Aisha radiallahu anha, she says, why you keep mentioning this old woman, that she's gone, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you better, me, the young one, that. And Rasulullah said, no, ma awadani khayr. No, she has not given me any, there is no better than she. In fact, he mentioned one time that the greatest of all the women in the sky is Maryam alayhi salam, and the greatest woman on the earth is Khadija. Very good. And furthermore, Jibreel alayhi salam came to Rasulullah and says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sending himself salam to Khadija. So obviously you could imagine Khadija, he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's the salam, And so similarly, also Jibreel alayhi salam came and told Rasulullah that give Khadija the glad tidings of Bayt min Qasab. And there is going to be a beautiful house for her prepared in paradise. of a special material. Qasab is basically, you know, bamboo, but it's not the bamboo of this world. It's the, whatever it is of the hereafter. It's a most marvelous abode for her. And so she has so many fadail. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give her just the highest place on behalf of all of Islam. So Khadija radiallahu anha was the first to accept Islam and Islam from Allah and the glad tidings of the house in Jannah. And these are, and obviously if you remember, we talked about Ali radiallahu anhu. Now he was a young boy, so he was actually the first among the children. So the first among the women was Sayyidah Khadija radiallahu anha. Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anha, if you remember, he was the cousin of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he was quite younger to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was also being raised by Rasulullah. If you remember that Ali radiallahu anhu was adopted, you could say, in a manner of speaking, by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Ja'far radiallahu anhu was adopted, so to speak, by Sayyidina Abbas to make a lighter burden for Abu Talib, who was in financial stress at that time. So Ali radiallahu anhu, obviously being in the house of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and again being enamored obviously by the personality of Rasulullah, so obviously it took no persuasion whatsoever for him to immediately accept the message as well. Zayd ibn al-Haritha radiallahu anhu also, as we know, that he was originally he was the slave who was sold in the market and ultimately in Syria, and he was given to Khadija radiallahu anha by her cousin Hakim ibn Hizam. And so then Rasulullah in some riwayats it's mentioned that Khadija radiallahu anha gave him as a gift, as a kind of a wedding gift. And in another riwayat it is mentioned that actually as soon as he was given to Khadija, Rasulullah just saw in him whatever he saw in him and said, I want it. So Khadija radiallahu anha gifted Zayd radiallahu anhu to Rasulullah, who immediately freed him, which was his habit, and he freed so many of the slaves. And so obviously Zayd, as you know, when his father came, you remember that he was actually snatched and sold, as was the habit of the Arabs. The big gobbles up the small, and the strong overpower the powerless. And so that's what happens. And so he ended up as a slave. So ultimately, his father came to know about that. His father came, to request, Rasulullah, and in beautiful poetry that he recited in front of Rasulullah, begging him that you are the son of Abdul Muttalib and you are the great people of the Haram and very generous. And so I come with the proposition, whatever you want, I'll give you. He said, I don't need anything. If he wants to go with you, he's free to go. If he wants to stay here with me, then he's free to stay. And so what was the reply? لا أؤثرك عليك. I won't prefer anyone over you, Ya Muhammad, even his own father and his own uncle would take it. So obviously his father was at once, wonderstruck and, amazed at the same time, seeing and experiencing Rasulullah himself. So obviously he said, well, he's in better hands than had he actually been with me, and he went off happily. In any case, so obviously Zayd was you could say, the first of the bondsmen, the slaves to accept Islam, even though he was set free, later on. And then Ayman, and actually her name was Barakah bint Alaba, who ultimately was elder to Zayd, but ultimately later on, as we mentioned earlier on, that she actually had married someone from Yathrib, and that marriage didn't work for a reason. And then ultimately, Zayd married her, and from that marriage was Sayyidina Usama bin Zayd, right? So she was also from, you could say, from the household of Rasulullah. And if you remember, she was the slave who belonged to the parents of Rasulullah, and Rasulullah inherited her and also, set her free and gave her her freedom. And then ultimately they married. She married with Zayd by the instruction of Rasulullah. And even though she was quite elder to Zayd, so Rasulullah told Zayd that, would you like to marry a woman from Jannah? This is a woman from Jannah, and marry her, And so that marriage took place, and what barakat was in that marriage. Sayyidina Usama radiallahu anhu was the outcome. Okay. And of course, the first among the Rijal, or the first among, the adult men, was the best friend, obviously, of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu ibn Abi Quhafa. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in respect of Abu Bakr, so Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions that I had not, invited anyone to Islam or gave the proposition of Islam to anyone except they had to think about it. They had to ponder over it. They had to, they had some taraddud, as it's said in Arabic. Some, it's this story. Except Abu Bakr. And this is why he's called Siddiq, one of the mawaqif, or one of the incidents of many in which he showed his superiority, that whatever Rasulullah had to say, whatever Muhammad had to say, his best friend, who he knew, as his best friend, if he says he's a Rasulullah, he is Rasulullah. So Sayyidina Abu Bakr was the first among the men, and through him, so many very important Sahaba accepted Islam. Among them, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, radiallahu anhu, and he was actually originally called Abdu Amr, the slave of Amr, which is obviously, we are not the slaves of any human being, we are the slaves of Allah. So Nabi alayhi sallam actually gave him the name Abdur Rahman, as opposed to Abdu Amr. Also, and these were very influential people in Quraysh, by the way. They were young men, but they were from very high lineage, and they were very influential people and very highly respected people as well. So the idea that only, the poor and the downtrodden followed the Rasulullah in their days, that's actually not correct. People from every strata of the society actually followed the Rasulullah. And among the first were quite influential people. Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, who later became known as Amin al-Ummah, the most trustworthy of the Ummah, and he was given, very important portfolios from the Rasulullah and others thereafter. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, again, one of the very influential of the Sahaba. And Zubair ibn al-Awwam, who was Khadija's nephew. And as Nabi ﷺ says, for every Nabi there is a Hawari. Hawari, a special companion. And my Hawari is Sayyidina Zubair, particularly in the Mawqif and the incident of Uhud, and the stellar, the stellar defense that he prepared, or he provided for Rasulullah, was the incident of that mention. Also, Khalid ibn Sa'id ibn al-As also was another among the influential of the Sahaba, and he has a very interesting story. Now, Khalid ibn Sa'id ibn al-As, okay, so he dreamt that he's standing on the edge of a fire. So he has this dream. He's standing on the edge of a pit, and his fathers are supposed to, be caring for their children, right? So his father is pushing him into the pit. Okay? And someone comes with two hands and grabs his two hands and pulls him back from the pit so that he doesn't fall. And then he looks to see, who is that? And it's Al-Amin. If you remember in the setting of the stone, of the black stone, the entirety of Quraysh said, that's the Amin, that's the trustworthy one everybody's happy about. So obviously Rasulullah was famous for that, for that title, and famous for that characteristic. So he looked and he saw that Amin, it's Muhammad ibn Abdullah. He's pulling me back. But of course he has no clue that he is, he has in the erstwhile, claimed to be the Prophet. So now he goes to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu and says, I saw this in my dream. And actually Abu Bakr, by the way, he was known for many things. Number one, he was beloved by everybody because of his personality, his character. He was a very soft person, he was a very loving person, considerate, and he was also well-to-do. He was a very successful merchant. At the same time, he also was known for interpreting dreams. He was gifted with that. By the way, interpretation of dreams is not something you learn out of books, right? Ibn Sirin, rahimahullah ta'ala, is famous for his book, Yani Ta'bir al-Ru'ya, and he was famous for, interpreting dreams. But actually, that is a special gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens up, the understanding of people. Sometimes you find someone illiterate totally, but they understand dreams very well. So that's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So anyway, he was famous for that. He was also the most knowledgeable person of Ansab, of the heritage, and the lineage of all of the Arab tribes. And since he was, totally, totally immersed in that science, if you will. So also that comes along with all of the history, So he was, if you like, a historian as well, because he knew, all the lineage of the Arabs, and he knew the stories that went along with all those past ancestors. And so Rasulullah later on took advantage of that, and so he used to, use that when he would introduce himself to the tribes who would come for Hajj. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu would usually be with him, and he would first of all find out who are those people, and then find out their lineage, and then he would say, "Oh, you're from such and such tribe, and your great 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 grandfather so and so, he did this and you did that. Oh wow, you know us. So yeah, you're great people. So I want to introduce you to my friend Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He has a very important message to give you." That was one thing. The other thing was that in Medina, if you remember, that. So in Medina, when the campaigns between Quraysh and between the Muslims took place, so the poets, and obviously as we remember, the greatest thing the Arabs had was their language, and they used to use it, as a double-edged sword. And so they used to, recite this poetry, dishonoring Rasulullah and defiling Islam and everyone in it, and motivating Quraysh to continue their fight and their opposition to Rasulullah. So, to oppose that or counter attack used to come from Sayyidina Hassan ibn Thabit, radiallahu anhu, the Sha'ir of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he would consult with Abu Bakr to find out, just as he knew the honorable things of all the tribes, he knew the dishonorable things as well. So he would tell Hassan that, okay, these tribes, and you can get this guy by this, their tribe has such and such who did a very dishonorable thing, and so forth and so on. And anyway, so he was also very knowledgeable about, the interpretation of dreams. However, this dream doesn't need any interpretation, does it? In any case, so Khalid went to Abu Bakr and said, "I got this dream, that I'm standing in this pit of fire. My father was pushing me in because his father was not a Muslim. They didn't accept his father." Okay, so then, and Muhammad is catching me and pulling me back. He said, "Well, you know what? He is the messenger of Allah, and he's pulling you back from the fire of hell. So accept Islam," which obviously he did immediately. Uthman radiallahu anhu, he has also a very interesting story. He was in a caravan coming from Syria, and he heard this voice that woke him up out of his sleep. And the voice said, "Sleepers, awake! Ahmad has come forth in Makkah." Now, nobody knew Rasulullah by the name of Ahmad. They knew him by the name of Muhammad. But Ahmad is also from the same root. So it's one of the names of Rasulullah. Just as Isa had mentioned that Rasul is coming, whose name is? Okay? So he has no clue. What is this? Who is Ahmad? And he came to Makkah. Sleepers awake. So who are the sleepers? Come to find out, all of those in Makkah and all of mankind who are otherwise unaware, of this message and this revelation coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, at the same time, Talha ibn Ubaidullah, who was the cousin of Abu Bakr, he was also in a caravan. And while he was in the caravan, there also, in Syria, so he met a monk. Now we've heard a lot of the stories of the monks who were, a number of them were quite well aware of the coming of a prophet and were in anticipation of that, as we mentioned earlier. So, this monk also met Sayyidina Talha anhu, and he asked him, "Has Ahmad appeared from the people of the Haram?" And so who was Ahmad? We had no clue who was Ahmad because nobody knew Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam by that name. So this monk told him, according to this riwayat, that he is the son of Abdul Muttalib's son, the son of Abdul Muttalib's son Abdullah. And he is to appear this month. They had it down to that calculation. If they write, of course, if it is substantiated, which Allah knows best. And he's also the last of the prophets. So now they meet up on the way. Uthman radiallahu anhu meets Talha, and they both share this, this amazing dreams and these voices that they've heard. So when they come back to Makkah, they also go to Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu because he was their close friend as well. And Not only that, but he was also, Talha was the cousin of Sayyidina Abu Bakr. So they went to consult with Abu Bakr, as people used to do with their various issues. And so obviously they came to know the reality and who is Ahmad. And so all of these now came to Rasulullah, accepted Islam. And Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala was a businessman, but he never made a profit like he made with this transaction. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 6 or 7 of the Ashar al-Mubashirin who came with the instance of Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala, and that was in the very onset of Islam. Also, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala, the one who Rasulullah says, if you want to take Quran just as it was revealed, if you want to learn Quran and hear it just as it was revealed, then read according to the recitation of Ibn Umi Abd. In other words, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala. So he was actually, as a young boy, he was a shepherd for Uqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt, who was one of the staunch enemies of Islam. And so it so happened that Rasulullah and Abu Bakr were passing by Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and his flock that he was attending. And so Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala asked Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, do you have, milk in your sheep? Can we have, milk? He said, actually, these are not my sheep. They belong to Uqba. They don't belong to me. And so I have no permission to give you, milk from these. So Rasulullah said to him, do you have any sheep? They might have been sheep, they might have been goats, I don't recall that. In any case, do you have any animal that has not actually mated? And as you know, no sheep or cow or camel or any female animal is going to give milk unless it has mated and it has a child, and then the milk appears, right? Generally speaking. However, Rasulullah, that sheep was presented to him, or that goat, whatever it was, and Rasulullah, touched the udder and made some dua, some adhkar or something, and then all of a sudden it filled. They took out the milk and everybody drank. And so Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is just watching this, and this is not, and then he put his hands back and touched again and said, let it be as it was. And it went back to its original form without any milk. Now, obviously, that's not something we see every day. And so obviously now he said, okay, what's this? And then Abu Bakr said, yes, this is Rasulullah. So also Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, immediately accepted Islam. So these are among the very early people to accept Islam. Also, Sa'id ibn Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufayl. If you remember, we talked about the people who were the Hunafa, or the people who were, they had, turned their backs on the shirk and the polytheism of the Arabs, and they were actually trying to, relocate or reconnect with the original teachings of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And among them was Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufayl, if you remember, we talked about him. So that was his son. So he also accepted Islam. And then Arqam ibn Abi Arqam, and that's in his house is where the Sahaba used to meet in the early days in Makkah. This was their markaz, this was their, their sort of, their special place. And they used to meet there secretly. Teaching and learning of the Quran used to take place there. And new converts to Islam used to be brought there, and they were introduced to Islam, used to accept Islam. It was very important. That was the central, you could say, place of the Muslims in the early Meccan period. Abu Salama, Uthman ibn Mad'un, who was the brother of Rasulullah bin Radha, from the nursing, they shared the same nursing mother. And his two brothers, Khudam and Abdullah, Khabbab ibn al-Arat, who, if you remember, he was the slave, you might have heard, and he was tortured mercilessly. He was dragged across hot coals, burning coals. He was dragged across them, and he was told to leave Islam, and he used to cry, one. And that back was just totally scorched. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, his khilafah, asked him, let me see that back of yours. And Umar, being that tough person that he is, but he could barely take it, the sight of that back. And this is the type of torture and type of sacrifices the early Muslims went through. And we get it for free. La ilaha illallah. May Allah give us gratitude for that. Ammar ibn Yasir, again, among those who were mercilessly tortured. He, his father, his mother, And Suhaib ibn Sinan al-Rumi, he has a very interesting background as well. Suhaib, actually, he's known as Rumi because he used to speak Greek, actually, according to what the historians say. And how that happened was that actually his father was the governor of a place in Iraq, which is called Al-Uballa or something. And it's near Basra in Iraq. And under that, at that particular time, it was under the Persians. It was under the Persian rule. So his mother took him on a journey, the son on a journey either to see relatives, or some say that for an outing or something like that. In the meantime, these Byzantine Roman soldiers came and captured, and kidnapped him and sold him in the market. Okay? So he was sold from hand to hand, and then ultimately, in the Byzantine Empire. And there he learned, actually he was an Arab. And he was originally speaking Arabic, but since a small child, he grew up in the Byzantine Empire, and so he spoke Greek, and that's all he knew. And then ultimately he escaped and he came to Makkah, and he got connected with Abdullah bin Jud'an. If you remember, he was the one that very generous person, and he did, a lot of good things. And Aisha radiallahu anha, if you remember, she asked Abdullah bin Jud'an, used to do a lot of good things, he used to help people, he used to, feed people, but Rasulullah mentioned, but he never said one day, may Allah excuse me for my sins. In other words, he did it to be called a good guy. It wasn't for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In any case, so he connected with Abdullah bin Jud'an, and he became perhaps an agent for him, and he became quite wealthy and well-to-do. However, after accepting Islam, it became, pretty disastrous for him. And ultimately, he left for Hijrah. And when he left for Hijrah, he left all of his belongings like all the Muhajirin did, and he took off. In the meantime, the people came after him in pursuit. And finally, a whole contingent of them came, and he was there. And he said, look, I'm a better archer than all of you. And as long as I have arrows, they're going to hit. So you're not going to kill me until I've taken out a number of you. No. On the other hand, if you want, I'll tell you where I've kept all of my money and all my belongings, and you can have that. Just let me go and carry on with my journey to Medina. They said, okay, that's fine. So they went back and they took all of his possessions. He came back. By the time he got to Medina, then already Quran had been sent down. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَشْرِي نَفْسَهُ ابْتِغَاءَ مَرْضَاتِ اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ رَءُوفٌ بِالْعِبَادِ. From among, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, from among his servants are those people who sell themselves for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, referring to the transaction of giving all of his wealth to those Meccans to release him so that he can carry on his hijrah and go to Medina and practice Islam and please his creator. So he was also among the very early people to accept Islam. And there's approximately 40 others within about 3 years period of time. And as we mentioned, they used to gather in the house of Arqam ibn Abi Arqam, and they were under severe duress and affliction, and we'll talk about that later, inshallah, in the next episode. Just to mention also some of the women also who were the early followers of Islam, the early acceptors of Islam. Fadl, who was the wife of Abbas. Al-Fadl was the brother of Abdullah ibn Abbas. So Fadl, it's said that she was the second woman to accept Islam, and not only those people used to accept Islam, they would accept Islam, and that would be the most important thing to them, and they would invite others, their own family members, their friends in their circle. And so she brought with her other 3 sisters, Asma, Salma, and Maymuna, who was later on to become among the Ummahat al-Mu'mineen. She was later on to become one of the wives of Rasulullah. Ayman, we mentioned about her earlier. Asma bint Abi Bakr, who was the elder sister of Aisha radiallahu anha, and Aisha radiallahu anha, while they were yet small girls, they had accepted Rasulullah and they accepted Islam very early on. And Sumayya bint Khabbat radiallahu anha, let's mention a little bit about her to conclude our dars for the night. So Sumayya radiallahu anha, she was the slave of Hudayfa ibn al-Mughira al-Maqsumi, who was, of course, he was a mushrik in Makkah. And she was married to Yasir ibn Amr, who was from Mudhij, it's a Qabila from Yemen. And so actually he came there to Makkah looking for his brother, and once he got there, then he decided he wanted to stay in Makkah. But as we talked about earlier, if you didn't have a family, if you didn't have, you were part of a tribe there, you were in trouble, because anybody could do anything they wanted with you. So he, took an allegiance and came under the protection of Hudayfa, and as a result of that, Hudayfa married him to his slave woman, Sumayya, radiallahu ta'ala. And so ultimately he let them free, so they actually were living as free. And Yasir, Ammar ibn Yasir was their child. So, but being who they were, and they had no tribe to defend them, like all of the other slaves and the downtrodden, they were severely tortured. They were put in the hot sun, and armor was placed on them like mail, iron mail, and they were placed in the hot sun. Now you can imagine here in California, you're placed out in the noonday sun, you're going to boil. Now you can imagine the sun in Makkah, 110, 115 degrees. They used to put their heads in the water and say, you speak evil of Muhammad, or you're going to drown, and so forth and so on. Ultimately, Abu Jahl killed Sumayya with his spear in the most private part of her body. So, radiallahu ta'ala anha. So she was the first shaheed in Islam. And then ultimately, when Abu Jahl was killed in Badr, and he was seen, Rasulullah saw Abu Jahl, killed in the battle. So he gave the good news to Sayyidina Ammar radiallahu ta'ala anhu that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has killed the killer of your mother. Allahu Akbar. So that is the story, or that is the mention of some of the more well-known of the Sahaba who accepted early on. And there was others among them, other women as well. And that was the nucleus of the early Muslims and the front line of Islam in the early days. Any questions? Not much to question, is there, right? Did we absorb? And listening to their sacrifice and listening to what they went through, and we're going to be listening to much more. So it should reflect upon us. We should reflect upon all of that, seeing that we sitting here in Southern California in a beautiful masjid with all the facilities, being handed Islam on a golden platter, so we need to be extremely thankful. And, as the position of these early Muslims and the position of every Sahabi, should take a special place in our hearts. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them the highest of rewards and the best of places from our side and from the side of all the Muslims and Muslimin and Islam. Now,
quick question. You said Khalid ibn Sa'id ibn al-As was the most knowledgeable from amongst whom of Ansar?
who?
Khalid ibn Sa'id.
Most knowledgeable?
You said he was the most knowledgeable amongst who of Ansar?
No, not Khalid. Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Sayyidina Abu Bakr was, a Nassab, they call him in Arabic, right? So he was, perhaps, some say he was the most knowledgeable altogether. Wallahu alam. Any other questions? Any other questions? No? سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد ان لا اله الا انت نستغفرك ونتوب اليك والسلام عليكم